Did we get that recorded? I hope. I hope not. You know, Jack, these kids don't know who Howdy Doody was.
You got the floor. I'm going to show you.
This meeting is being recorded. Okay.
Might be different, but what I'm saying is.
Okay. Everybody hear me? Okay. Maybe I need a microphone. I'll have to talk like this, won't I? Slowly and with articulation. Good morning, folks. And it's good to be here from Bastrop with Vicky K5VXN. I've been a member of this club for 10 years now, and 5 of it I've been in Bastrop, but some habits you just can't break, you know. Thanks to all the communications technology, people like KM5HT and John Skier, K5SKR, keeping the DMR repeater up, but whatever. We're here to talk about digital today. Anyway, I'm Steve W5HK, and back in my first career, I was a product consultant at Motorola in the HF SSB product group, believe it or not, which seems like a long time ago, especially since Motorola is not really in the HF business. And I worked in the marine environment, and then I followed up in the land mobile environment in Latin America between 80 and 82, and helped set up the system, the Airport Services Administration in Mexico, between all the different airports, a big system, single sideband, a vertical with about 5,000 radials under it. Didn't work very well, by the way. I mentioned this because we're all looking for this holy grail of communications on HF, and it certainly isn't single sideband. It's a thing called digital. I've been a fan of digital since I discovered HF RTTY in the late 70s, and I was mostly on RTTY for several years there, which we'll talk about in more detail. But let's talk about the basic stuff first. Digital modes that are used for voice. Let's start with that. And on VHF and UHF, is the mouse going to work? Here we go. D-Star is the original digital mode, and it's still supported by Kenwood and JVC. Who in this room has used D-Star? Sam, of course. Me, John. What happened to it?
Still there.
Still there. Sort of. Yeah. I think this is right. C4FM is the Yaesu proprietary format.
Yep.
Everybody has the Yaesu radio, has that. So maybe people use that. Then there's the one that really counts called DMR. DMR, digital mobile radio, is a world commercial standard promoted by Motorola, heavily used in public safety, adopted in amateur radio, more or less about 2010. Now, it's a clear market leader in amateur radio. It offers a bunch of advantages that you don't get with the other formats. And we've had numerous talks in this club on DMR, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it today, except to mention it's kind of our de facto favorite here. The club has a DMR repeater that's linked through the Chicagoland Sea Bridge, who, by the way, is the same character I knew some years ago at Motorola when I was traveling, great RF engineer. And 2 of us in the club, Mike and myself, are net controls for the Texas statewide DMR net, which meets every Wednesday night. So we're kind of wired into DMR. Before we leave all this, does anybody have any specific questions about any of these formats on VHF and UHF? Don't be shy.
C4FM, is that normally known as fusion?
Confusion, yes.
Okay.
Fusion, yes.
Just wanted to be sure.
And if Chris Cotter were here, we'd have a little story, but he's going to be late. So anyway, hey, they're all great formats, and Fusion and DMR have the same audio quality. So that's not the reason we don't promote it, by the way, but that's certainly not that issue. But anyway, let's talk about, what about digital voice on HF? Anybody ever played with that at all? Besides Sam, of course. Sam has played with everything. Sam, you ever played with FreeDV?
Which one?
FreeDV?
No.
Okay, there's only one mode on digital HF that I find really common. It's called FreeDV. It's got a flagship. It's a bundle actually. Its mode is Radio Autoencoder RAID project. So it's a free application that will work on any SSB radio. I have personally used this mode, although it's been a few years. I haven't changed it that much. It is a viable alternative to single sideband communications on the HF bands, and interest has remained minimal, which is not something I really understand. And there's a little bit about what it's about. It's on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And it runs at 1600 bit per second, modulated into a 1.25 kilohertz wide 16Q PSK signal. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? On receive, you receive it back through the audio, the typical audio, what do you call it, the demodulator. It is actually pretty good. You can read down to 2 dB signal to noise, and they report long distance contacts at 1 to 2 watts. Now, I didn't use it enough to make that determination, but that's what I've read. It's an open source project. And if you want to get on this mode, if you want to get on HF and play with digital voice, this is the one to use. I think I'll wait a second here. Okay. But nobody has played with it. One of the reasons, never heard of it. Okay. One of the reasons in fact, I should go back a little bit. Why are we doing this today? We're supposed to be talking about VarAC today on HF, but we're not quite ready for that. So Mike and I were talking and said, well, let's just do an interim introduction to digital modes. And I kind of got into this project a little deeper than I wanted to. But the cool thing about this whole subject is it will overwhelm you with the variety of digital formats that are actually out there. You don't know which one to play with. But this is, I'm trying to make some solid recommendations. If you want to play with digital voice on HF, this is the one to use. And it's actually not that hard to set up. I'll wait till our next visitor comes in. Anybody important? No. Of course they're important. Just wait a second here.
We can move this chair over.
There's actually room by me. Anyway, read the specs. There are 15 carriers, 14 DQPSK, and 1 that carries synchronization, 50 baud each. Combined, they carry the voice data, call, sign, text, etc., and synchronization information. Now, one thing that ought to leap out real quick, you see 15 carriers there. What does that spell? Bandwidth. So you say, oh, this is not free. This is still 1.25 kilohertz bandwidth. That's what the program looks like. I know that's very hard to see. There's a waterfall. There's the bandwidth here. And you'll see up here, if you look real close, it says mode 700D, 700E, and 1600. It actually has a 700 hertz mode, which I play with a little bit. And Mike, you and I need to play with this. Yes, we do. You seem to have time for all this stuff, so let's try that. So I'd like to try to get
All my free time.
your free when you're not doing everything else. Anyway, free DV. Well, and speak of the devil, it's the man that. Good to see you, Chris.
Chair here.
Got a chair here. You missed the short talk about.
You can sit right here.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm gonna go back for just a second
Gonna
because
shake the carriage.
I did a quickie overview of the 3 digital formats on VHF,
Welcome,
UHF.
Dennis. Howdy, howdy. I guess Bedford got out.
Yep.
How you doing? Anyway, we were talking about the 3 digital formats on VHF and UHF. One of them was, of course, C4FM, which we call Fusion. And Chris brought a Fusion repeater, I believe, 10 years ago into the club. We had it up for a while. What was our experience with Fusion?
It was fine, good standard, it just, around here, there's not. One of the big things is just.
And we discovered DMR. Anyway, just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on it. Okay, going back to free DV, we're talking about digital voice on HF, free DV. Have you ever heard of it? Played with it by chance?
I've heard of it.
But here's the trick. If you want to play with free DV, you got to have 2 sound cards, which is no big deal. You have a USB plug-in, but every radio seems to have one built in right now. So you can get on tonight and you can monitor this stuff and listen to it with 1 sound card. I did not find it particularly difficult to use. And so why didn't I do more of it? Well, because dogs, kids, grandchildren, CW, the important stuff, you know. Okay, that's my recommendation if you want to play with digital voice.
Is there a specific frequency slice set out for free DV?
There certainly is. 14236 is the main frequency they use.
20.
And basically you go to freedv.org, everything's there. Download the program, frequencies, there's a web page you can go to see if anybody's actually on looking to talk. So it's a very cool program actually. So we're gonna have to play with that. If you guys are interested. Okay. That's it for digital, that's it for voice now. Let's move on to what I really want to focus on is digital modes used for texting. And of course, the granddaddy is FT8. It's revolutionized this hobby. And it really has. I've heard it accused of being not real radio, which is kind of funny because it is radio. Stop and think about what this program really does. it allows you to send a very small amount of information reliably over long distances with minimal signal to noise ratios very efficiently. And it really is not, it's not radio per se, because it's two computers talking to each other. Let's just call it what it is. It's two computers talking to each other. And you get back a legal contact that you can use for getting awards and DX Century Club. Everybody know what DX Century Club is. It's the ARRL program that was very popular years ago for working DX. You get your 100, then you can go up to 300 and something. A few people I know have actually done that, but that was really hard to do in the single sideband days. And it's really easy to do with FT8, work 100 countries, as you'll see.
But then it's been true that, I think it was reported at one point, it is the most popular mode across all single sideband digital. CW, it's the most.
And why is that,
traffic
Sam? Why is that?
Why is that?
Why is it so popular?
Because it's.
It's easy.
You don't have to talk to a person.
You know, and
Exactly.
No mic frame.
you know, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly what's happening in our hobby is people don't want to talk on voice, they want to text. And that's a big part of what I have discovered here. I think this whole thing was inspired by Joe Taylor's work. Joe Taylor, K1JT, is a Nobel laureate in astrophysics. And I actually researched him. I thought he might have had some of the research on with the deep space probes and communication stuff, but he was just inspired by it. And back in 1977, we launched a couple of spacecraft called Voyager, and they went, well, when they were sent out, they were designed to talk as far as Jupiter and Saturn. That was it. And in the years it took, 14, I think, to get the first one out there, they improved the algorithms. And somebody at NASA figured, you know, I think we can stretch this thing out to Uranus and Neptune. So they added that onto the mission and got pictures of Uranus and Neptune. Then they shipped it off to the Kuiper Belt, both of them. And we're still communicating right now with those spacecraft in the Kuiper Belt. And that's because of the improvements in digital processing that occurred since when it was launched. And I think a lot of this inspired Joe. So what he came up with, and he has revolutionized the hobby. And anybody know what year it started? FT8? Must be a long time ago, right?
So,
2017.
yeah.
I mean, it was just, I was in the club 3 years when we found FT8. So FT8 is part of the WSJT-X suite of applications developed by K1JT and his team. And as Sam said, it's easily the most popular mode to use for DXing and working DX stations easily. And I'm going to ask Sam another question here. Sam, how does it compare with CW as far as getting through with weak signals?
How
How does it compare? Yeah,
My understanding is it's actually more effective.
it's actually more effective. That's right. So you can get through with signal strengths that are amazing. Now, I mentioned it has the distinct advantage of anybody running 100 watts or less with a minimal antenna, the opportunity to compete and work foreign entities that were prior available to guys running single sideband and kilowatt, a 3-element beam up 50 feet. That's what I had 40 years ago. And I compared very much the ease of making contacts on phone, trying to get that 100 countries on FT8 right now with a wet noodle, 10 to 20 watts, and not much power and not a very good antenna, as we have heard me bitch about repeatedly, by end-fed wires and HOA. I think it's really great for what it is. It has one big disadvantage. It's not set up for chatting. You can't really get on and talk. All you can do is exchange signal reports. But anyway, it's incredible. There is a variant called JS8 call that uses the basic FT8 protocol and overlays it with some changes and gives you a slow keyboard to keyboard chatting. Has anybody in this group ever used JS8? Okay, you're in for a treat. Let's take a second here and look at FT8. I think most people in the room know FT8, but when you see it in red here, you actually, the other person, in this case, I17 ICT in Italy. He called CQ. I called him back and I gave him a signal report, I guess, of +7. Oh, wait, wrong one. -18, -20. See the dBs here? -18 and -20. Those are pretty weak signals. And we had a short 90-second or less contact. And this is done through an exchange of data that's done at a fairly slow bit rate. I think it's 15 seconds. Transmit, receive for 15. They're synchronized. Now that's important to remember because it's this integration with time. a low bit rate signal with narrow bandwidth stretched out over 15 seconds is what makes this all possible. And you get back to talking about the Voyager spacecraft, same thing. They will send a picture that takes 3 hours to get through at a slow bit rate. Now, that worked really good. That was 2 days ago. Then I called OE4KSF, and he had a minus 22 dB. I didn't get through to him. See all the attempts here in yellow? So sometimes it seems ridiculously easy, and sometimes it seems hard, but there's a few tricks to FT8, which I won't bother to get into unless somebody else wants to, but this is just an amazing mode for making quick contacts and getting getting awards. Now, WSJT-X is a suite of programs, and here's a list of some of them here. I'm not going to read them all here. You've even got one echo signals to the moon, back and forth. These 3 modes, JT4, JT9, and JT65, use nearly identical message structure. JT65 was heavily used before FT8, by the way. But they're all weak signal. I've got a problem with the path type modes that they use. They were designed for EME, moon bounce, on the VHF, UHF microwave bands. JT9 was optimized for MF and HF, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a newer one called Q65. It's highly recommended for EME, ionospheric scatter, and other weak signal work, et cetera. I show you this not to overwhelm you with how much cool stuff there is, but it's what do you do? Which one do you play with? You know,
The one that works.
I mean, I don't have, it's so many years left to live. Can I play with all these modes? And no, I can't. So I'm going to try to give you some recommendations here. Obviously, FT8 is a no-brainer if you want to get DX contacts and QSL cards. Okay, there's another mode in here, FTS4, FTS4W, little variants, makes all kinds of recommendations as to which one to use. F4W is a quasi beacon of whisper style messages. Now we're going to talk about whisper in a little more detail. And whisper implements a protocol designed for probing potential propagation paths for low power transmissions. It's fully implemented within WSJT-X. But what is this really good for? I'll let Sam comment on this because he and I are both fanatics of using whisper. Why do we use whisper, and how easy is it to use, Sam?
So main application I've used it for is testing your antenna.
See how well you're getting out?
Exactly.
That's exactly right. And if you have a wet noodle for an antenna, it's particularly important, and which I sort of have. This is on March 12th, running 50 watts. I know I was running high power that day. And an end-fed wire, the famous W5 PFH end-fed wire that we put together as a project for the club, up 12 feet. And this is about a half an hour's worth of whisper activity. You see about a dozen stations in VK and ZL land. You see Hawaii, you see Brazil. You see I believe this is the Antarctica research vessel. There's a couple of them off the coast of Antarctica that are usually on, and all over Europe. So am I getting out? And you can actually see the list of the stations you work here, hearing and heard by. And you can dig down deeper and see what your signal to noise ratio is if you want to catch all that. But the bottom line is it's a really cool way to see if you're getting out. And it's kind of fun too. Okay. That's whisper. Now there's another one, a subvariant of the WSJT-X suite called JS8 call. JS8 call allows you to chat keyboard to keyboard. And it uses the basic protocols that FT8 has. And this is what the program looks like. And I bet you can't even see that, can you? But it shows you the waterfall built in over here. And it's a fairly narrow bandwidth. And this is a real live contact on JS8 call I made a few days ago. And you'll see, if you look at the right here, I actually put the entire conversation. It's a short conversation. And this guy was in Virginia. My first contact on JS8 call, how does it compare with VarAC? And I did Vera for a while. To me, this is a much more user-friendly mode. VarAC was a little complicated for me. I like JS8 call. It says easy, blah, blah, blah. I say this because we started this whole conversation of doing this technical presentation on VaraChat, and we kind of left out JS8 call. I say we, I'm talking about Rebecca. Rebecca and I are actually doing the VaraChat thing together. And I'm not so sure anymore that we should blow off JS8 call, because it may be slower, but it's built in. It's actually easier to set up. And if you don't have a lot to say anyway, usually you get short conversations back and forth with very minimal signal strength. Okay. That's that JS8 call, kind of part of the WSJT-X suite. What is Q65? I mentioned this because this is kind of the newest one. Long distances when nothing else will happen. Yeah, I hear this. It's whatever they all claim. They're going to be the ultimate medium for long distance communications when nothing else works. 65 tones, frequency shift keying. That takes some bandwidth, doesn't it? Yeah. Sync tone is ideal for tropospheric scatter, range scatter, ionospheric scatter, TEP, transequatorial propagation, and EME on VHF. And Joe Taylor says it will enable stations with a modest Yagi and 100 watts or more to work one another on 6 meters at distances of up to 2,000 kilometers on most days of the year. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Anyway, I thought I'd mention this because I haven't played with it, but it looks like the next mode within WSJT-X. And just to give you some idea of what he's doing here, these are the different modes listed and what he suggests, the different propagation modes and what he suggests as a variant of Q65 to use. You'll notice these numbers, 15C, 30C, 30A, 120E. I just grabbed a couple of them, and that's basically how long the transmission length is. We talk about FT8 with 15 seconds. Whisper has a 2-minute transmission time, which means the longer you transmit the same bandwidth, the better the signal to noise ratio will be. Anyway, with Q65, 22.2 dB signal to noise ratio with the 15 seconds, 60 seconds, minus 27.6, say minus, relative to 0. 300 seconds, 33.8, below the noise level. So that's 3 minutes. Why, 300 is 5 minutes, isn't it? Okay, so all kinds of stuff that Joe Taylor and his group have come up with if you really have the time to get into it. Let's talk about some of these modes. This is supposedly talking about digital modes, and I'm really talking about propagation modes as well and how they tie in with this. I see that we have people right now, this is really new, they're bouncing signals off of geostationary satellites. They're not using the moon. And what it takes to do that, and really cutting edge to say the least, to take a signal, bounce off of something that's a few feet across and have it return to the earth and have actually get a contact from it. And these guys have done it in Europe using a 20-meter dish. Anyway, so they use the Q65 mode, which is specifically designed for recovering weak signals. I mention this because there's all kinds of these characters out there, small groups that are trying these different modes and doing different things, and you can kind of decide what interests you. But now the FCC recently updated its regulations to allow 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth digital modes below 30 megahertz. That's actually big news because it really was a limiter to experimentation on HF. The FCC kind of assumed if you're on HF and you're running digital, we don't use much bandwidth. They think that was the idea. That's not really totally the idea. So now we're saying if you can do it in a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth, same as a single sideband signal, we don't care. And that is huge, I think, as we'll see. And that means an MSK 144, which is used for moon bounce, that's built into WSJT-X, and the new Q65A can be operated on 10 meters instead of just 6 meters and above. If you have time, right? There's your frequency right there, 28140. This is the what it looked like for this signal they used to bounce off of a geostationary satellite. I want to just point out one number in here. The red means they have signals and they're very low signal to noise ratios. But notice the frequency here, 1296. Anybody here ever been on 1296? I haven't. So there's ICOM radios that have this built in. I'm going to shorten this just a little bit. They were able to make a few contacts using this method. A remarkable achievement they can add to their list, which includes receiving a signal from one of the Voyager spacecraft. To receive a signal from the Voyager spacecraft, what NASA is doing is a 100-meter dish, I think. I think it's 14 feet of the spacecraft out in the Kuiper Belt, and now we're up to a 100-meter dish. And they're getting signals from these two both of them still. These guys have been doing it. They've been receiving signals from Voyager, so they're kind of a serious bunch. Okay, let's go now to more mainstream modes, as I've tantalized you with some of the newer stuff out there. EME, Earth, Moon, Earth. moon bounce. And I know none of you have played with moon bounce, and I haven't either, by the way. It's been around since the 50s, EME. And the big problem is significant path loss going 250,000 miles each way to an object that's not really very reflective. And starting with what we had in the 1950s to where we are today, it's this earth shaking, what you can now do that you could not do in the 1950s, mostly because of digital techniques. There's my moon bounce right there. It's the closest thing I could find in PowerPoint. Thank you, Mike. Start with EME today. This is what you need. We're going to compare this to what you need in the 50s. I need a transceiver, of course. Most EME enthusiasts use 2 meters, 450 or 440 or 1296. Guess which one is the easiest one to get a signal off the moon on? 1296 for a lot of reasons. And there are radios you can buy off the shelf, 1296 in it. A high gain directional antenna like a Yagi. Okay, that's what kind of a Yagi? You go look in the 50s, you'll see 30 and 40 elements ganged Yagis together or parabolic reflectors. I need an amplifier. Well, how much of an amplifier? 100 to 250 watts. We'll do it. A low noise amplifier receive and modern digital techniques such as JT65. That's the biggie right there. You can decode signals that are below the noise level. Let's go back to the 50s though, which I had a lot of fun researching. Look at some of those outfits. My goodness. I'm not going to read this word for word, but this was a huge deal. This is 1953. They're trying like crazy to do a two-way contact, bouncing signals off the moon. In an amateur radio, they didn't succeed in 1953. I'll just leave it at that. But the U.S. military was actually pursuing this technology for a lot of reasons. It's a signal corps, bounce signals off the moon on 110 megacycles. They called it cycles in those days, instead of hertz. And he talks about the problems here. The best available information indicated that it would take the level amateur power limit, a kilowatt, push to the last watt, an antenna gain of at least 20 dB required, and a degree of receiver performance to tax the ingenuity of the best engineers in the business. And they were trying to do it on 144 megacycles. They talked about a WAS Worked All States Award on 2 meters, which could only be done EME. You could not get terrestrial communications on 2 meters and work all 50 states. So it became in vogue in the 70s when this became more common to work 2 meter WAS, and some of the contacts would be EME, they'd have to be. But okay, they talks about the kind of person in 1953 that was trying to do it, and it was very cutting edge. There was no commercial amplifiers, there was no commercial anything. You had to build from scratch. So when did it finally happen? 1960. And this is an article out of October Electronics World, 1296, a 1 kW klystron. Anybody know what a klystron is?
Yeah.
It's a transmitting tube and a radar, right?
Yeah.
So this is a little more off the shelf now. And I think it was still a kilowatt, parabolic antennas. And they did it in July of 1960. And they talk about the club in California and in, I think in Massachusetts, they talked to each other. They did a CW and single sideband. I think it was single sideband, except single sideband didn't really become in vogue until about 1960. It was AM amplitude modulation in the 50s, which is a whole lot worse signal to noise ratio wise than single sideband. This was a very big deal when it happened, I remember. EME, ham radio.
Track an EME to keep your signal strength worth anything?
Well, the moon moves pretty slowly. So yeah, the answer is yes, you did have to make it. The bigger the antenna, of course, the more precise it is. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? I'm talking too fast. Okay. Military interest in moon bounce. In 1954, we had a NASA, a Navy engineer in Maryland talking to himself. What he was doing was speaking into a microphone to a large antenna. Can you imagine what the military had? Snub neck radio facility. He sent the signal to the moon. He waited 2.5 seconds. He heard his voice come back, 500,000 mile round trip. So that was the first voice transmission via the moon. But it wasn't two-way. It wasn't two stations talking to each other.
I'd like to mention one thing about moon bounce, pretty interesting, is which played a big role for amateur radio. This new spacecraft that was supposed to land on the Earth, there landed 2 of them on the moon, and it went down and it fell over, because of the radio signal of amateur, they saw a spike in it where it actually could have fell over because amateur radio operators sending moon bands to the moon.
So they were listening to the spacecraft.
They were listening to the spacecraft, right?
Very cool. There are the people doing this kind of stuff. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, this is like 54 and 51. They were sending radar signals back and forth to the moon, but no voice. And why was the military interested in this technology? Well, it turns out that they thought that they might be able to use the moon as a radar intercept device capable of spying on Soviet communications. That they developed a top secret project called AMOR. And what they're trying to do is intercept signals from the henhouse radio dish in the southeastern Soviet Union. This technology was strictly to listen to signals from the Soviet Union bounced off the moon. They were trying to listen to them. So military did all kinds of things like this in the 50s. 1951, they had the first radar reception from the moon. Okay, these years are important because in 1957, the first artificial satellite went up, Sputnik. A few of us remember that, don't we? And I do remember in October 1957 on an air base in West Germany, getting ready to go to school, and you get up and my mother's talking about the Russians just launched the first artificial satellite. And guys, it was incredible news. It changed everything. The US military was scared to death. Yeah. So, oh, well, maybe we don't want to continue with this other technology. This is a more reliable. Remember, we're still using shortwave radio for everything. Okay, so. But it was still, their major focus of the military was to find better ways to communicate using natural phenomena, whether it's HF or scatter. Now I make a little note down here that in 1957, the December issue of the IRE, the predecessor of the IEEE journal, this whole article was devoted to meteor scatter as a viable, reliable communications mode. And you could reach out hundreds of miles, et cetera. But the point here is that interest cooled almost immediately. The military was very big on this until Sputnik. Now said, well, maybe we better kind of drop this. But meteor scatter has never really disappeared as an interesting topic, both military and amateur radio use. And for that, I only have one slide on it, but meteor burst or meteor scatter is actually, I've never done it, I sure love to, on 6 or 2 meters can be very reliable, about 200 to 400 kilometers. So using this stuff with a fairly minimal antenna, lower gain, you'll see in the drawing here, if I can get my mouse to work again, that the lower gain antenna highlights a larger part of the sky, more meteor trails, and a high gain antenna, a smaller part of the sky, but maybe higher signal strength. But you don't want too big an antenna on meteor scatter. But the thing about meteor scatter is that there's always a background count of meteors. You don't have to wait for the per season meteor shower. They're always there. So you can reliably communicate on meteor scatter if you have the right equipment. And this
Any time of the year.
any time of the year. Some are better than others. Another project for us, right, Mike? I don't know about the antenna situation for me. RF output, oh boy, 100 watts. You do it with 100 watts. A regular VHF commercial grade transceiver, a preamp, that's on 2 meters. You wouldn't have that on 6 meters. Horizontally polarized antennas, and not 20 and 30 dB of gain, but 10 or less. And there is a mode built in that's used for moon bounce and as well as highly recommended for meteor scatter, WSJT-X. So what I've tried to do here, folks, is give you some ideas as to the various digital modes that are part of WSJT-X, which seems to be the only one that most of us ever use, WSJT-X, and some of the things you can do with it. There is another program I highly recommend called FLDIGI and FLRIG. Now, some of you guys have used that, I hope. It's been around forever, W1HKJ and Associates. And this is a list of all the various programs this guy gives away for free. And I use FLDIGI and I use FLRIG. With FLRIG, you can control your radio remotely. It's very cool, it's very simple, and it's very free. So this is what FLDIGI looks like. And I can't keep moving my thing here so I can read it. It offers an impressive array of modes you can play with also, just like WSJT-X. Too many, I think, for my attention span. You look over on the left here, it starts with CW, of course. Then a bunch of other modes, Contestia, Domino EX, Hell, IFKP, blah, 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 MT63, Olivia, and there's PSK, finally. And there's a 8 PSK, there's RTTY, there's Thor and Throb, very interesting names. WeFax. Anyway, this, I bring up PSK, you'll see there's a menu for PSK, which was the most common keyboard mode or text mode in amateur radio before FTA. I used it pretty heavily for a few years, very cool. Comparable to CW, Sam, would you say, as far as?
I've not actually used.
Okay, yeah, because you're not an old guy, that's why. I use it quite a bit, and I found it to be somewhat comparable with CW. Of course, I wasn't doing a whole lot of CW at that time, but whatever. Okay, and here's the granddaddy of all amateur radio modes in digital. Kind of circle back around, it's RTTY, and that's built in to FLDIGI. If you want to play RTTY, you don't have to go very far. So what I've tried to do is these two programs will do it all, pretty much. WSJT-X and FLDIGI, and get you on digital. So let's circle back to where we started this whole discussion, VarAC. This almost sounds like a commercial blurb here, which I think where I got it. It takes on, it's efficiently delivering critical messages, heavily used in emergency communications. And it's a reliable link under poor conditions, low power, small antennas at minus 22 dB. VarAC is still able to maintain a link. It can be very fast. And using the Vera protocol, which is a commercial protocol developed by a guy in Spain, gives you two speeds, 1500 bits per second, 500 hertz bandwidth, and 7050 bits per second, 2300 hertz bandwidth, and on VHF and UHF. Who here has played with VeraChat? Sam and I have talked on it, and you done it, Mike.
You done it.
Who?
Jack's done it too.
Jack too. That's right. So what do you think of VeraChat? What do you think?
It's pretty cool. I don't know if you have it on here, but the other thing that's kind of cool, like if you get, I know there's a free mode, but it pays a license. It's a one-time thing. And, it actually also works. There's also a VHF or FM,
Yes.
which you can use for things like WinLink. We've got WinLink gateways. So that's another. And that license covers all one time.
Yeah, I have not paid for a full-blown VeraC license, or Vera license. Vera is the actual modem, and VeraC is the overlay program. A little confusing. Here's the VeraC program right here, guys. And you'll see I'm listening to beacons here. It's in beacon mode on 40 meters. There's the call sign. Some of these guys are on all the time. K5CCC. And there's CQs, it's CO2D, C and Q, but he's on all the time. I think he lives on VeraC on 40 meters. And I'm sending out my beacon every 15 or 30 minutes here. And this is actually going to be really hard to see, but this is a actual chat I had about a week ago on VeraC. And I'm going to read you just a little bit of what he said to me. Hi, I'm Carlin in Lampasas, Texas, 5 watt span dipole. And I said, hi, I'm Steve near Austin, very cold here. And yes, not as bad as snowpocalypse, but my heaters have been on turbo here, survived that one in Round Rock. Said Lampasas is close, right? I should know in Bastrop, 25 miles east or south side. Yes, our northwest of Austin up Highway 183. I should have moved to Bastrop when it showed up to Austin in 2011, some of that. And it's just quite a bit of stuff here. Yes.
Just another really cool feature with this VarAC, Jen, is that it's asynchronous. Like if you beacon out, you can just set it up and just walk away, go have dinner, and come back. And someone could have sent you a message. So it's kind of like you don't have to be right on on the computer. So you can it's like you send an email, you come back later and get a response, and that's pretty.
It's like a voice malfunction under it, I think is what it's called.
That is one of the problems with the mode is that it's not very immediate. You get on, I want to talk to somebody right now. You might wait 10 or 15 minutes. So, but look at the amount of data we send back and forth here. This is on the cheap, free 500 hertz bandwidth mode. This is not the high speed one. And you really don't need to buy the license to get on VeraC and chat like this. And there are some advantages to using the 500 hertz bandwidth instead of the 1750, I think it is. This guy was running 5 watts on a fan dipole. I was running 30 and my end-fed wire. This reminded me of the good old days on a PSK 31 or an RTTY. Could I really just get on and just chat with the guy? Okay. Sam just mentioned WinLink, another acronym to take home. This is email, and WinLink is another free program you can download. And you'll see here's an email I sent to Rebecca. And there's a time it was sent. And the substitutes notes on VarAC and JSA call. And if you look up here on the top, you'll see open session telnet WinLink. And I'm keeping it simple, but you bring it up. Sorry, what?
I think you cheated.
What, using telnet?
Using telnet, you cheated.
You bet I did. But that's the idea. You can use this as an email client. And I get on telnet and I can check my email. Then I switch, I didn't show it here, open session VarACF. I can change the modem to VarACF. And I do, and there is what you can do on VarACF. You can talk to an HF gateway. There's a list of them in the United States. Denver on 7061, he's running Vera 500, the narrower mode. And you'll see they're all over here. I actually connected with the one in Albuquerque on 40 meters to see if it worked. Then I ran out of time.
You know, of course, one thing interesting about the WinLink protocol is it has so many different modes. It's the only, I think it's the only digital mode that you can go into 2 meters and transmit on 2 meter and come out on HF anywhere. That's the only protocol that
I think you're
know
right.
that does that. And as far as modes, you got all kinds of modes you have access to. You got AX25, you got WA8 BED backdoor, and then you have VarA FM, VarHF, VarSat for satellite phones. And then another protocol that, or another mode nobody ever uses, especially in this area, because I'm a WinLink guy and I'm promoting my gateway. That's why I'm saying that.
Are you? I'm so glad you showed up. That's
I'm
great.
N5XHI. I have a VHF gateway in North Richmond Hill.
Very cool.
But one thing that I'm trying to communicate to the local clubs is we need to get the WinLink Arden going. Because if we only have VHF gateways in this area, when the internet goes out, we have nothing. Unless you have a Primo gateway that you can send your VHF through the HF. We're dead in the water unless you have an Arden or you have a post office set up. Okay, and that's what we need in this area. This project got started back in 2000, WinLink. And what's interesting is me and my wife went to the first train the trainer in this area was put on by the the hospital. Tarrant County Public Health Department. They put on train the trainer program back in 92. 2012. That's what it was. And we did that. And since then, we still have not achieved the gateways in this area that we want. We only have 3 gateways in our area. 3. You go to Dallas, they have tons of them. You go to Houston, they have tons of them. You go to California, they have tons of them. So I'm encouraging the local groups to start a gateway. Keep at home like I did. But Arden is a way to go. But that's all I gotta say.
There you go. Sorry, what was your name again?
Jeff Robinson.
Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
XHI.
We'll talk more, but. So WinLink is a whole world unto its own. And in fact,
Another thing is shares. If you are part of the system, the cybersecurity government shares program, they are now allowing, where you don't have to buy the real expensive backdoor modem. They are now allowing VarAHF.
yes,
Because the VarAHF is as fast as, they're realizing the VarAHF is fast as the backdoor modem. And the agencies don't have to pay $2,000
right.
to get the money.
Thank you. Yeah, there's people complaining about Vera because it's $69 to buy the license. Then Pactor costs you $2,000. That's what ships at sea will use commercial outreach.
Give you a good example why I got the license. I use Tom's Gateway down in down South Texas. I forget where he's actually at, but in N5TW, and without a license, it takes me 40 minutes to send 3 emails to his 500 bandwidth gateway. With the VARA license, it takes me 3 to 5 minutes, depends on propagation.
And
40 minutes to 3 to 5
what
minutes.
is the trade-off, Jeff, though? What's the difference if you use the high speed mode versus?
But actually, his setup is, even though it's a 500 bandwidth, if I go in there with a bar license, I'm getting up to 2,000 bandwidth or 2,000 bandwidth. It's just.
That's the
So
trade-off. The
Because
bandwidth.
his gateway is saying, hey, I can do better, do it.
Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy the VarAC. I'm just saying you don't have to if you want to chat.
Right.
Yeah.
You
And,
don't have to get started in it.
Quite right.
And it's,
If you wanna go 10 times faster, it's only 9, but. Yeah.
6 times faster.
5 minutes to 45 minutes.
That's a huge difference, but a huge difference.
And guaranteed, when you do it on your credit card company will, stop the purchase because it's from a foreign place. You just have to get on your phone and say, yeah, I did purchase this from, I think Sweden or something like that.
Spain,
Well worth it.
EA8. Anyway, this is very important stuff. There's a huge amount of synergy between WinLink and VarAC, obviously. And we're going to actually do this specifically in that Tech Talk in May, talk about VarAC and WinLink together. So, but obviously there's a focus of all this. It's called emergency communications or prepper communications, as I kind of call it myself. What would I do if I lost everything? The phone system, nothing worked, and you 2-meter talkies don't do anything. It really comes down to HF, and this I've decided is the ultimate. Texting 100 miles reliably with low power and minimal antennas. That's probably going to be VarAC or HF email gateways combined together. So, okay, what's the oldest mode in amateur radio? It is CW. Right? What's the oldest digital mode in amateur radio?
If you.
I'm an all CW. Well, I don't call that digital. Special CW is for, seriously, it's RTTY. And I mention this because it's kind of disappeared, but, and I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to go a little faster here. The US Navy started playing with this stuff with an airplane to ground in 22. And you'll see that we had high-speed teletype links between New York City and San Francisco and between Honolulu and Los Angeles in the 30s. But I remember fondly seeing a story about when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. They had teletype links, but we had a huge communications drop out that day on 20 meters. So nothing went through. Anyway, teletype communications is as old as Morse code. And in fact, I'm not going to read all this, but some of these characters in here back in 1849 were using landline teleprinters that developed into what we know as RTTY. Emil Baudot, the code is named after, invented the Baudot code. He improved it, did a 5-bit version of it, 1870s. It's basically what we have today. And this is particularly important because in the internet that we had in the 1900s was a telegraph system and cables, undersea cables. Sam and I read the same book. What's the name of that book we read about the internet? Victorian Internet. And I never really understood how they could multiplex 3 or 4 conversations on the same telegraph cable. They really weren't. They were using this technology. It was really a teletype communications in 1871. That's what teletype looks like. Big monster right here. That's the signal. Frequency shift keying, 170 hertz apart. I used to have one of these, by the way, in my house in Elgin, Illinois. And it would turn on and it would sound like a helicopter landing on the roof. It was great. Oh boy, I'm gonna go play teletype. Every self-respecting old guy in the
And a
19th century
helicopter in the other room.
had a Vibraplex bug and had a teletype machine. Very cool stuff. And then this is the HAL ST6000, which kind of revolutionized RTTY. And this HAL was named after the computer in the movie 2001, by the way. And this is what Motorola used to drop ship to commercial customers in Latin America, HAL ST6000, and Ham used it. I had one. Oh, incredible piece of equipment. I spent hours on the air teletype talking to friends. So there's a huge history to teletype in amateur radio, which is primarily interesting because the regulation and the FCC and requirements, it took decades to get the approvals to use this stuff over the air and to get the ARRL to recognize this legitimate mode. It was not until the 70s you could work 100 countries on RTTY. I got to tell you folks, this mode is really a ball. It really was a ball. And I've been looking for something like it ever since. I think it really is going to be VarAC. And we had a thing called RTTY-ARC. Anybody remember that? People would print off 2 or 3 sheets of paper with pictures from RTTY, and you hang them on the wall of your shack. It was an amazing time. RTTY looks like this, two signals, 170 hertz apart. It used to be 850, and then they discovered narrow bandwidth would work better. And with no error correction and a start-stop system that is prone to false starts, RTTY is not the best mode for amateur radio use. However, it is easy to use, easy to tune, fast, tolerant of drift, and is widely used for contesting for these reasons alone. A linear transmitter is not required. So, and they, even in the 70s and the 80s, they developed, you got 2 tones, you know, if you don't hear something in both of them, they would anticipate where it should be. It had some built-in intelligence that made it work better, the HAL SD6000. I want to finish up here. This is important because all these discussions about these digital modes, we talk about signal to noise ratio, and we usually start at 0 dB. And I've seen signals that are above 0 dB, 3 and 4 dB, but most of the time you're down minus 22 on VarAC and JSA call. You get down to minus 30 with some of these esoteric modes that WSJT-X is promoting. But this whole calculation is based on a receiver bandwidth of 2500 hertz, because that's what we're kind of used to talking about. And that would be phone, or even a VarAC. I think the VarAC bandwidth of the fast mode would be about that. So it uses quite a bit of bandwidth compared to the narrow mode. So how do we compare a signal that Whisper with 6 hertz wide? Remember, so Whisper has a 120-second transmission time. How do you compare that reasonably with single sideband remote that's in real time that uses 3 kilohertz? The answer is you can't. But we try to do that by these signal to noise ratio measurements. I dug around, and this is the closest I could find to an explanation of how this really should be. Effective signal to noise ratios for various modes. And this guy concluded that we needed an adjustment or a measure called this right here, EB over N0, which is a function of the bandwidth as well as the signal to noise ratio. Single sideband voice, let's just go back to the old way, 10 dB, but 31 dB with this measurement. But just even using the old one, single sideband voice versus CW, what's the difference between 10 dB and minus 12 dB? 20. And that's why CW is so much more efficient. You can't hear a voice signal. You can copy a CW signal. And Opera, which is one of the modes that's in FLDIGI, minus 23. RTTY is minus 5. It's appreciably better than phone by a function like 15 dB. So it works real good. PSK31 minus 10, 5 dB better than RTTY. Whisper minus 29 dB. Like signals you just can't hear, and the computers can integrate the information across 2 minutes and tell you, put the information out, measure the guy's signal strength and its call sign, etc. JT65 minus 24 dB. So this gives you some idea of the relative effectiveness, and this is the newer measure right here, which I'd like to see used more. It's confusing, to say the least. So how do you compare all this stuff? And the answer is you got to be careful. I love VarAC, but VarAC is not as efficient with bandwidth as CW is. And I think I figured out that in 3 kilohertz bandwidth, you can have 4 or 5 VarAC conversations going. And if you get on VarAC, you'll see the slots, and it'll let you pick the slot. But anything that can be compared to a single sideband transmission and put 5 of them in there, it's pretty amazing. But what would that be in relation to CW? I calculate 50 CW signals can fit in a voice bandwidth. Of course, you need some pretty good filters, keep them apart. And RTTY, I mentioned there's a huge advantage there. ESK31, 50 hertz bandwidth, and about as effective as CW. So it's important to keep in mind the bandwidth versus the signal to noise ratio. You can't just measure them all the same way. Modern modes such as FT8 rely on time integration and minimal information going back and forth. Whisper even less bandwidth at 120-second transmission time. VarAC allows near RTTY level speeds with modern coding techniques and low power in the error correction. But there is no free lunch. Higher bit rates, if I can get this out of the way again. Higher bit rates at faster speeds require more bandwidth. It's just that simple. You just can't get around that. And here are just a quickie verbal visual of the difference in the bandwidth that somebody says, my goodness, I'm talking too long. Now, there is some irony, I think, in talking about these modes, because the ICOM modern equipment like the 7100, which I have, 7300, which most of us have, 7610, they all have RTTY in them. That's a brand new radio with all kinds of fancy features, but it's got RTTY in it. Go figure. Most people don't know that. You don't need anything to copy RTTY in that radio. Now the IC 7100 features D-Star. So two of the most antique modes in the hobby are sitting on the newest radios, and I can't figure that out. And I rummaged around more, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, the Shiego X6100, the one you have. Decode CW.
It's not the greatest CW decoder.
No, there's no such thing as a great CW decoder, except your ears.
It takes it a little while to figure out the key rate. Once it does, it's okay.
It's okay, okay. It'll also decode PSK 31 and RTTY. The Elecraft, that's RTTY, and does PSK 31, I believe, on the K4. The Kenwood 5 TS590SG decodes CW. Doesn't do anything else. I don't know why, I just find that interesting. Final thoughts. Gotta have a teletype machine, guys. I've got to get a hold of Rebecca. She had to buy a Vibraplex bug. Got,
That was that way,
how much did it weigh?
yeah.
It took two people to move it, the
Okay.
table and everything. And that happens to be my first amateur transceiver I built, right? The single sideband transceiver, the HW100. That's not my own, but same thing. Anyway, final recommendations. Don't frustrate yourself by trying to do all this stuff. Pick a couple of things. WSJT-X, JS8 call, VarAC, RTTY, okay? Start with FT8. Play with Whisper to check your signal, how you're getting out, which is really important if you're HOA limited. Okay, Whisper has been a lifesaver for me. And some of the more exotic modes, I think playing with meteor scatter would be a ball myself. Now, EME is very, very feasible now with smaller antennas and 250 watts, but I could care less personally. I don't know why, but meteor scatter and VarAC, if you want reliable prepper level communications when we lose everything, it's going to be a JS8 call or VarAC and 10 watts and a battery and a dipole. Okay. We're going to talk heavily about this in May. Those two, VarAC and WinLink, and a little bit about JS8 call. And as I said, if you're really into retro radio, you need a teletype machine. Can't live without one. I'm going to finish up with a few pictures here of what I've been dealing with my antennas. There's that very fancy looking thing that W5 PFH put together, which works just great. And fed wire, the edge of my house up about 15 feet, right here. Cables coming down. There is my 18-foot vertical. That's actually an 18-foot vertical between two trees in my backyard. There's the Ballon. There's the remote tuner right here and ground plane radials laying out. Not quite permanent yet. And there it is again. And if you look at that picture, do you really see an antenna? Apparently not, because nobody said anything yet. Now the end fed wires, you got one going from the side to the front of the house. You can't see the wire. It's in there. And this is the back of the house. Is the W5 PFH end fed wire goes from here all the way to across the backyard. And that's where they come in. That's my entry point. And it's because of 5 years of living with this that I got so interested in these modes. But FT8 and VarAC, JS8 call, and we're going to talk about that a bunch, and WinLink in May. Any questions?
I'd just like to say, if you happen to have someone else mow your yard, make sure your antenna wire.
Thank you all for being patient. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Bury your ground.
Bury your ground. Yeah, we're going to do that. We'll have Shannon do that for us. He does our work.
Have you looked at the DV switch at all?
Do I have a what?
Look at DV switch.
Delta Victor switch? No,
No, I guess not.
I'm looking at my screen on my phone and it has DMR, D-Star, YSF, P25,
Right.
NXDN,
Yes.
STFU, and they're working on M17.
These are all for VHF and UHF, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't really, there's AP25, I guess.
You can integrate it into all sides.
But I really wanted to focus on the HF side of digital voice. I really encourage you guys to try free DV if you want to do that. Anybody have any questions or anything? Thank you very much. Okay. I'm sorry, Mike, I went way too long today. So now get on.